An Ohio man says he registered to vote 77 times in a year and a half. Another says workers from the community activist group ACORN pursued him until he registered 10 to 15 times. And now the group is publicly admitting that it cannot stop fraud in its ranks. ACORN is the largest community organization working to get low-income folks to register to vote, a voting bloc that usually goes for Democrats. Now investigations are underway in these 12 states, including the battleground states of Ohio, Missouri, and Florida. With us now is a woman who says that a worker from the ACORN group in Cleveland harassed her so much that she registered to vote 6 times. Latilia Goins is with us live. Latilia, good to see you.
Good to see you, Shepard.
What do you mean they harassed you until you registered 6 times? Break it down for me.
Well, the thing is that they will follow you. They are everywhere. They're on the buses.
Tell me what they did to you.
I would get off the bus from downtown Cleveland and they'd be there. I go to the grocery store, they'd be there.
And what do they say?
They follow you. Can you please just sign this? They really want to, it increases their paycheck. So
So for everyone they get signed up, they get more money as individuals?
Yeah. Yeah, and even if you tell them that I've already registered, they'll be like, well, just sign your name and give us the last 4 of your social and we'll do the rest, which is how I got registered at so many different addresses. And actually, I registered to vote at the DMV, so I never really needed to be registered. It's just that you feel kind of pushed and kind of forced to do it, and you don't want to say no because you don't want to be mean, but you don't want to. Yeah. You don't want to be harassed either.
But as it turns out, so what you're saying is people who don't get up in your face and say, shut up, get away from me, those people end up registering over and over again. When did you realize, man, I shouldn't be doing this?
When the Board of Elections called me and told me that I might not be able to vote this year. And this would be my first year to vote, so I had to go to the Board of Elections and reapply all over again. So on top of all the times I registered, I still had to end up reapplying anyway.
Do you have friends this has happened to?
It happens to everybody. If you live in Cleveland, Ohio, you know. If you go to downtown Cleveland and get off a bus or just walk down the street, there are maybe 15 people to every one person who's walking down the street who will try to register you to vote, and they all work for ACORN.
And what happens if
Moments ago, though, we did speak to Secretary of State Jennifer Brunner. We had asked her if she has any information that there is voter fraud happening in Ohio.
There are a number of basically allegations that don't have any evidence to support them. There's much more conjecture than anything else. We have a great number of procedures in our law that would prevent voter fraud in Ohio, but I think that some people are alarmed because we've had record numbers of people register to vote.
I think it's outrageous that someone would suggest that there is not enough evidence to be highly suspicious of a rogue organization like ACORN. They do a disservice to the community-based organizations across this country that try to empower the poor and to make sure that we give voice to all of our citizens. This is an organization that has a history of voter fraud. This is an organization that in at least 12 states are under investigation.
Today we followed up on the early get-out-the-vote efforts in Ohio, and one of the biggest questions on everyone's minds are nonpartisan volunteers working for groups like Faith Vote actually influencing voters as they transport them to the polling places. We caught up with one such volunteer. Take a listen. What's the general consensus? Who are these people planning on voting for?
I'm going for Obama.
And most of these people?
Yes. I think it's time for change.
And are you encouraging them to vote for Obama?
Oh, yes, really, I am. It's like their brother right there.
You tell them to vote for Obama?
Yes, for Obama, yes.
You do tell them?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
And what do they say when you say vote Obama?
They say yes. Yes, okay.
So you're going out here to get votes for Obama, not just to get people to vote, but to actually get them to vote for Obama?
No, just to give them the vote. Okay, all right, I got to go.
Politicians, of course, all blaming one another. Barack Obama pointing the finger away from himself. But my next guest says that group ACORN, we were just talking about a moment ago, a group that has endorsed Obama for president, is at the root of this big financial mess. Now, ACORN is the same group that's being investigated for allegations of voter fraud in states across the country. Here to explain this right now is Stanley Kurtz. He's a senior fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Institute. Hi there, Stanley. So explain to us the connection between ACORN and the subprime mess that got us into this big economic mess to begin with.
ACORN is a group of very radical community organizers. They've been very strongly supported by Barack Obama, although he sometimes likes to deny that connection. Obama has channeled funds to ACORN from various foundations he's been on. He's done training for ACORN of their leaders. And what ACORN does is they try to intimidate banks into giving these high-risk loans to low-credit customers. This is what they did for years, especially in the late 80s and early 90s.
What do you mean? What kind of stuff do these ACORN activists do to try to get banks to lend money to people who are in the subprime market?
They would flood protesters into the lobbies of banks, scare away customers. They would send protesters to the homes of bankers. They would break into private offices of bankers to scare them. And they would file complaints under something called the Community Reinvestment Act, which is a law that ACORN used to try to force these banks to make these high-risk loans.
Now, on the other hand, though, some of these banks did want to get into the subprime market because they could make higher margins that way. What about that?
In the early 90s, that wasn't happening. The banks were resisting ACORN at that early point. And what happened at that point was that ACORN realized that they would never bring the banks around to these high-risk loans unless it got Fannie and Freddie in on the game. Because the banks would say, hey, we can only make but so many of these risky loans to you because Fannie and Freddie won't buy them. They have very high credit standards. So ACORN went to its Washington lobbyists. It put a lot of pressure on its Democratic allies in Congress. And that's how Fannie and Freddie got their credit standards changed and really watered down so tremendously. Then everyone said, oh, we can make a lot of money at this. But what really started the contagion of these bad loans was the pressure from ACORN and Democrats onto Fannie and Freddie.
Now, we had heard a lot about some of the Democrats on the Hill who didn't fully investigate Fannie and Freddie, and lots of people upset about that. But we haven't really heard this angle at all about ACORN going into the banks, say, lower your standards, give people who can't afford these homes, give them loans, and bringing us to this point. So what do we do now? ACORN's getting a bunch of money from the federal government under the housing bill that was signed into law by the president and passed by the Democratic Congress last summer.
Well, I think the outcome of the election is going to make a huge difference as far as that goes. If McCain comes in, I think ACORN's going to get seriously investigated. And if Barack Obama comes in, then they've got one of their best friends in the world as president. I think they're going to be in gravy.
All right, Stanley Kurtz, we're going to have to leave it there. You've been following the ACORN angle for quite some time, often writing for the Wall Street Journal. Thanks a lot. There you go. Fox News senior judicial analyst Judge Andrew Napolitano is here to talk about this. Okay, Judge, so there's an investigation underway in 12 states. The offices of ACORN raided in Nevada after a bunch of guys went in and registered to vote under Dallas Cowboys names. How is this investigation going to work, and can it do anything in time for the election?
Well, at this point, the 12 investigations of which you speak are state investigations. Some of them are by local boards of elections, which have no authority to punish. They only have the authority to say, thou shalt not vote. Some of them are by prosecutors, like in Nevada, which have the authority to arrest and prosecute and indict.
Okay, House Republican Whip Roy Blunt just called on federal investigators to respond to widespread allegations of voter fraud by ACORN. So can the feds do a lot more than the states?
Yes, and here's why. Most state laws punish you up to a year in jail for voter fraud. Voter fraud is the people who organize these phony registrations as well as the people who register themselves. It's a rule of thumb amongst judges. A year in jail with no prior record means 0 jail time. But the feds can prosecute under something called RICO, which provides for 20 years in jail for people who organize a criminal conspiracy to subvert the election laws.
Okay, so to make sure that our entire election day isn't messed around with and stolen, is there anything that can be done really between now and then?
That's the bad news. We probably won't know if any election fraud happened until election day is over. And if it's too close to call, then we have problems.
You can wrap an old fish in a piece of paper called change. It's still going to stink.